Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace the incredible journey of English language teaching. It really is a story about shifting ideas, revolutionary tech, and, this constantly changing sense of what it even means to learn a new language.
To really get a sense of how far we've come, just look at this. On one side, you have the old way. Listen and repeat. The book is on the table. You say it over and over, you get the grammar right, but it's not exactly a real conversation, is it? Now look at the other side. Today, a student can literally debate the future of space travel with an AI anytime, anywhere. So, how did we get from there to here? Well, it all started with a focus on being absolutely perfect.
So, back in the mid-20th century, the classroom was a place for rules. Lots of rules. The whole idea was to build language like you'd build a brick wall, one perfect grammatical block at a time.
A method like audiolingualism was super structured. Here's how it would go. First, you hear a little dialogue. Then you repeat every single line. The whole class, then you by yourself. The end goal? Memorize it, and then drill those sentence structures until you could say them in your sleep perfectly.
This whole approach was often called PPP, presentation, practice, production. The teacher presents a rule, you practice it in these super controlled drills, and then, hopefully, you produce a perfect sentence. It was all about this idea of grammatical competence, just knowing the rules inside and out. But here's the question. Is knowing the rules actually enough?
By the 1970s, the answer was a pretty loud no. Researchers like Peter Skehan were pointing out that, hey, this super rigid way of doing things, it just doesn't line up with how our brains actually learn a language. Something really important was missing. And that feeling, that sparked a revolution.
And that realization, it led to one of the biggest shifts in language education ever. It's the dawn of what we call communicative language teaching, or CLT, and it was about to change everything.
So here's the crucial shift. We moved from focusing on grammatical competence to communicative competence. It wasn't just about being correct anymore. It was about being understood. Think of it this way. It's the difference between knowing all the parts of a car engine versus actually knowing how to drive the car.
Communicative competence is all about the real world. Can you ask for something politely? Can you give someone advice? Do you know how to talk to your boss versus how you talk to your best friend? And so classroom activities started to change. You saw more role-playing, more group projects, stuff that actually mimicked real communication. But right as this massive shift in teaching was happening, another revolution was just booting up.
Just as teachers were getting the hang of this whole new communicative approach, this other force for change shows up: technology. And the arrival of what we call CALL, computer-assisted language learning, was about to add a whole new layer to everything.
You can pretty much track the history of CALL alongside the tech in our own lives. Back in the 80s, it was clunky software on a desktop computer. Then you hit the 2000s, and suddenly it's Web 2.0. We're talking wikis and blogs, collaboration. Then, of course, the smartphone arrives, and you've got mobile learning. And now we're in the age of AI.
A big analysis of research papers shows us which technologies really had staying power over the decades. Software, chat, multimedia, no big surprises there. But you also see these Web 2.0 tools for collaboration, and even these really specialized things like language corpora. Those are basically massive databases of real-world text so students can see how words are actually used, not just how the textbook says they are. Now, this is really interesting. It points to this tension in the field, because while a lot of theories about learning were being developed, a huge chunk of the most influential research was totally atheoretical. It kind of shows that a lot of innovation isn't coming from some abstract model, but from teachers in the classroom just trying to figure out what actually works.
So with all these new tools and a much more global student population, our whole idea of what makes a great English teacher had to evolve, too.
So get this number. An estimated 80% of English teachers around the world are multilingual speakers who learned English themselves. And that single fact, it has forced a much-needed rethink of a very old and, frankly, outdated idea.
The entire field is finally moving away from this idea that the native speaker is the gold standard. Instead, we're embracing the reality. What really matters is a teacher's skill, their training, and their ability to empathize with the struggle of learning, often because they've been through it themselves. I mean, the job description for an English teacher today is so much more than just expert in grammar. They have to be a digital guide, a cultural mediator, a champion for student well-being, a critical thinking coach. They're basically the architects of these entire learning experiences. And all of these threads, the shift in philosophy, the rise of technology, the new role of the teacher, they all lead us right here, to this exact moment, and to the most powerful tool we've seen yet, artificial intelligence. I really love this new metaphor that's starting to emerge, and you can see it visualized in this map from a study. Teachers aren't just passengers on this AI train. No, they are the pilots. They're the ones in the cockpit actively steering the technology, looking for opportunities, and watching out for any turbulence. And the potential upside is just huge. AI can create personalized learning paths for every single student. It can give instant feedback. It can whip up a custom lesson plan in seconds. It's like having a 24/7 conversation partner and a massive library all rolled into one. But, as every good pilot knows, you gotta be ready for the risks. And yeah, there's definitely some turbulence to watch out for. Becoming too dependent on AI could hurt our own critical thinking. There's the loss of that human touch, and then there's a really big one: algorithmic bias. We know that some automated grading systems can actually penalize students for having certain accents or vocal pitches. That's a serious problem for a tool that's supposed to help everyone. And maybe the trickiest risk of all is this fear of losing our own voice. This quote from a teacher really captures it. As we're surrounded by more and more AI-generated language, does our own writing start to sound less human? Which brings us to this last and I think most important question. AI is getting amazing at automating the how of teaching. It can make the quiz, design the lesson, even hold a basic conversation. But the real challenge for us is to remember the why. Can AI inspire a student? Can it build their courage? Can it make a real human connection? As we hand more and more controls over to our AI copilot, the future of English teaching might depend less on the tech we use and more on the humanity we bring to it.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into the incredible journey of how we teach and learn English. It's a wild story, really, full of massive shifts, technology that changed everything, and a future that looks nothing like the classrooms we grew up in. But first, let's just cut to the chase with the question that's on everybody's mind. I know, it sounds a little sci-fi, right? But as you're about to see, the tech to make this a serious question is already here. And honestly, how we answer this one question is going to shape everything else. So to really understand where we're headed, you got to know where we've been. And the first huge revolution in teaching English was this big shift away from just memorizing grammar rules to, well, actually being able to talk to people. For the longest time, the whole point of English class was what we call grammatical competence. You know, if you could write a perfect sentence, you were golden. But then this really powerful new idea came along: communicative competence. This is all about knowing how to use the language, like when to be formal versus when you can be casual, or how to tell a joke versus how to give a business presentation. It's basically the difference between knowing all the ingredients in a kitchen and actually being able to cook an amazing meal. That old way of thinking gave us methods like the PPP model. Super simple. The teacher presents a rule, the students practice it with these super rigid drills, and then they're supposed to just, use it. The problem? Well, the theory behind it has been pretty much debunked. We now know that drilling a rule over and over doesn't really mean you can just magically use it in a real-life chat. So the solution that popped up was a total game changer: communicative language teaching, or CLT. And this flipped the whole philosophy on its head. Suddenly, the goal was actual communication. The classroom became a place to play around with the language, and, get this, making mistakes was seen as a totally normal, even necessary part of learning. The focus shifted to building both accuracy and fluency, using things like pair work and role-playing just to get students talking. You know, this whole new way of thinking, it really set the stage perfectly for the second revolution, the moment technology walked into the classroom. Finally, we had tools that could actually help make this whole communicative dream a reality for a lot more people. And this is where computer-assisted language learning, or CAL, comes into play. And man, it evolves fast. Back in the 80s, you had these clunky microcomputers. By the 90s, boom, we've got interactive multimedia.
The 2000s gave us Web 2.0 with things like blogs and the very first online chats, and then in the 2010s, learning went mobile, and we even started dipping our toes into virtual worlds. Every step of the way, learning got more interactive and way more connected. So, what were the researchers looking at during all this time? Well, this chart shows that most of the brain power went into things like software, text chatting, and multimedia. But, and this is a really big but, almost all of this research was done on university students. So what about kids in elementary or high school? Yeah, that was a huge blind spot in what we knew.
Which of course brings us to right now, the third and, you could argue, the most powerful revolution yet, the AI revolution. This is where technology goes from being a helpful tool to something else entirely.
What's the single biggest, most mind-blowing change? It's this: constant access. For the very first time, a learner can have an intelligent practice partner, a chatbot, or a personal tutor ready to go anytime, anywhere, 24/7. The old limits of the school day? They've just been completely shattered.
And the potential benefits here are just staggering. I mean, imagine a system that creates a totally unique learning plan for every single student, one that changes on the fly based on how they're doing. It can give you instant feedback on your pronunciation. And for teachers, this is a huge deal. It could automatically create lesson plans, frame them up to actually focus on the students. And when you mix it with things like VR, you can create these incredible practice scenarios that were just impossible before.
And check out this quote from a recent study. It really nails the optimism that's out there. The idea isn't that AI is some kind of threat. It's that it's a tool that can empower teachers, helping them get even better at what they do and meet all the different needs their students have.
But yeah, it's not all smooth sailing. With all this incredible power comes a whole new set of really complicated problems. As a lot of researchers are putting it, we're now flying into some turbulence ahead, a time when we have to get real and reckon with the downsides of AI.
To really get a handle on this turbulence, some researchers have actually mapped it all out, kind of like a flight path. This journey of putting AI into our schools has clear skies and amazing places to go. Those are the opportunities. But it also has some serious storms and pitfalls that we have to navigate very, very carefully.
Take language tests, for example. On the one hand, a lot of people who take AI-scored tests say they feel like they're more fair and consistent. But then you hear these really troubling stories about algorithmic bias. You know, AI models that struggle with certain accents or even higher-pitched voices, which could tank someone's score for no good reason. Of course, human scorers have their own biases too, so it's a real tough trade-off.
And then there's this other kind of chilling concern about authenticity. This quote from a teacher, it's really powerful. The worry is that if students rely too much on AI, they could actually start to lose their own creative voice. The more they talk to the AI, the more, well, they start to sound just like it.
So what does this all mean? Are teachers on their way out? Absolutely not. Not even close. This brings us to the real resolution, a complete reframing of the teacher's role. They're not being replaced, they're becoming more critical than ever. They're becoming the pilot, navigating us through these new digital skies.
So, what's the final verdict? Well, the consensus in the research is pretty crystal clear on this one. AI is not going to replace teachers, but it will absolutely fundamentally change their job. And that means the modern teacher's toolkit needs a major upgrade. It's becoming less about just delivering information and more about being a guide. Teachers now need the digital smarts to figure out which AI tools are good and which aren't. They need a huge focus on student well-being, on the social and emotional side of things. Their role is now to be a mediator, someone who makes sure this tech helps everyone and who teaches the one thing AI can't, how to think critically. So, we've come a long way, from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, and now to the pilot in the digital skies. The debate is pretty much over. AI is here. So the question we all have to answer now, as teachers, as learners, as citizens, is no longer if we'll use this technology, but how we'll choose to navigate it all.
You know, when you really think about it, learning a language has always been about one thing: human connection, right? It's about building a bridge from one person's mind to another's. But what happens when that bridge is built by artificial intelligence? Well, right now, that very human experience is facing the biggest disruption it has ever seen. Take a look at this number, 1.5 billion. That's how many people are learning English around the world at this very moment. It's a staggering number. Every single one of them is looking for a key to unlock new opportunities in business, in science, in culture. And the very nature of that key is about to change. Because for all 1.5 billion of them, a brand new force has just walked into the classroom. You guessed it, artificial intelligence. And it is promising to reshape everything we thought we knew about how you learn a language. Okay, let's dive in. Now, before we can really wrap our heads around this AI revolution, we have to look at the world it's stepping into. For decades, English teaching has been on this slow and steady journey, moving away from just memorizing grammar rules and towards something, well, a lot more useful. And it all comes down to this big idea called communicative competence. The goal totally shifted. See, it wasn't enough to just know the rules of grammar. You had to actually use the language in the real world. Could you make a request? Could you give someone advice? Could you switch gears between talking to your boss and talking to a friend? That became the real test. And this led to a huge change in the classroom. We went from these rigid, teacher-led drills where every tiny mistake was corrected to interactive, student-focused activities where just getting your meaning across was the most important thing. It's called communicative language teaching, or CLT. But even this modern approach has a major bottleneck. One teacher can't possibly give 30 students the constant one-on-one speaking practice they need. And that is exactly where the story takes a very sharp turn. Enter the AI chatbot. Think about it. A tireless, totally non-judgmental, 24/7 conversation partner that promises to solve that practice problem once and for all. It's here to basically supercharge the whole idea of communicative teaching. And listen, this isn't some sci-fi dream. It's already happening. The language education giant Berlitz is already deep into using Microsoft's AI. And you know what their biggest challenge was? Finding an AI that wouldn't freak out and reject a student's answer just because it wasn't the exact phrase from the textbook. This gets right to the heart of it. The AI has to be flexible enough to handle the beautiful mess that is real human speech. So how does it actually work? Well, first, these chatbots can simulate endless conversations, giving learners a safe, low-pressure space to practice whenever they want. Second, they give you instant, private feedback on everything from your pronunciation to your grammar. And third, and this is super important, they can model what we call pragmatic language, basically teaching students how to say things in the right way for different social situations, which is a huge part of real-world communication. But like any powerful new technology, this disruption is a real double-edged sword. It comes with incredible promise, but also some very real dangers that we're all just beginning to grapple with. I mean, on the one hand, the opportunities are just massive. Think about it, truly personalized learning paths that adapt to every single student. Unlimited 24/7 practice on tap. The AI can even whip up custom lesson plans and materials for teachers. This is the dream, right? A much more effective and accessible language education for literally everyone. But, and this is a big but, the challenges are pretty scary. Who owns all of the student data that's being collected? What happens if students get too used to the AI doing the heavy lifting for them? And maybe the most troubling thing of all is the very real risk of algorithmic bias. This is what that bias actually looks like. We're already seeing reports that AI scoring systems can struggle with certain accents or even higher-pitched voices, which unfairly penalizes whole groups of learners. If the AI is trained on a narrow set of data, it doesn't just make a few mistakes, it actually reinforces inequality. It turns a learning tool into a gatekeeper. All of this, of course, leads to the million-dollar question. In a world full of AI tutors, what in the world happens to the human teacher? Well, the answer seems to be in a new way of thinking that's becoming absolutely vital. It's called self-regulated learning, or SRL. It's not so much about teaching English anymore. It's about teaching students how to learn. It's about coaching them to set their own goals, check their own progress, and figure out what strategies actually work for them. So let's just ask it. If you have an AI tutor that can drill grammar and vocabulary 24/7, does that mean the teacher's role gets smaller? No, absolutely not. It's not shrinking, it's shifting. The teacher's role actually gets elevated. They're no longer just the person at the front of the room who has all the right answers. They become a facilitator, a mentor, the orchestrator of the entire learning experience. Their job becomes more human than it's ever been, building motivation, encouraging critical thinking, and teaching those crucial learning skills that an AI just can't touch.
But for teachers to become these orchestrators, they're going to need a whole new kind of training. This means we have to radically rethink teacher education itself, because you just can't prepare them for the classroom of tomorrow using the methods of yesterday. And this is where we hit a really big problem. A recent study found this huge gap. While almost 90% of education professionals say AI is important, only about 30% say it's actually part of their teacher training programs. And about the same number are actually using it. There's this massive disconnect between knowing the future is here and actually preparing people for it. Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. As AI gets better and better at handling the mechanical parts of learning a language, the drills, the vocab, the basic corrections, it frees up the human teacher to focus on what really, truly matters, fostering curiosity, building confidence, teaching empathy, and nurturing that one thing that got us all started on this journey in the first place, that deep human desire to connect.